Hey everyone, first I want to thank the panelists here for taking the time out of their day to be a part of this panel. I'm really excited to moderate today and just speak with everyone here, as there's so much knowledge and experience that everyone here has to offer. Today we'll be talking about technology adoption. With so many new tools and technologies being built and launched every single day, how can companies really improve awareness, documentation, onboarding, and retention for all of these different tools and products? With the context of this conference and the panel we've lined up here, I'm specifically interested in developer tools in the API space. In the last year, we ran a developer survey that found that a 2 times increase in GraphQL usage and a 3 times increase in async APIs. So how are these new technologies and tools going to impact a developer's day-to-day workflows? I want to take a minute to introduce the panel here and just learn a little bit more about can the panelists hear me? I think we're running into some technical.
I can, yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So we're running into some technical difficulties, but we're going to start with introducing the panel here. If Mary, right to the next to me, would go ahead, that'd be great to introduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. So my name is Mary Thengvall. I am the Director of Developer Relations at an open source process automation company called Camunda. And I work with a team of 10 people these days to really just enable the developers who are using our products. And that could be anything from making sure they're aware of all the products that we have and the resources that we provide, to improving our developer experience, and also creating some great communities for them to hang out in and share what they're working on, as well as ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Next up, we'll hop on over to John. John, would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'm John Bohannon from GitHub Partner Engineering. Partner engineering means a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. At GitHub, we focus on our technology partners to enable them to create compelling experiences for our shared users. So when you go to GitHub Marketplace and you see integrations, they're using APIs that talk to GitHub, and partner engineering is behind some of these great partners and integrations that we have. So thanks for having us on the panel today.
Awesome, thank you. Tina, would you mind introducing yourself just briefly?
Hi, I'm Tina, the founder and CTO of Transposit. We are a DevOps automation platform. And so, interestingly enough, we came to Postman last year. And at that point, we were focused entirely as an API development platform. And so we sort of up-leveled that, but we have lots of interesting API integration technology.
Awesome, thank you so much. Elmer from Twilio.
Hi, yes, my name is Elmer Thomas. I'm a staff software engineer at Twilio on the developer interfaces team. Our team is responsible for our helper libraries in all the various languages, and the API Explorer so that you can play with API on the web, and our Twilio CLI. And we're always researching how developers interface with our API today and in the future towards creating the best developer experience that we can provide. And I'm very happy to share our learnings today. And I feel very excited and honored to learn from the brilliant minds on this panel. So thank you very much for having me.
Likewise, I couldn't agree more. And last but not least, Gigi, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Geraldine, but I go by Gigi. I'm a developer advocate at Tableau, a business intelligence platform. So we have a bunch of APIs and developer tools for our developer ecosystem. And my role is enabling the developer ecosystem by creating content, organizing events, but also working with internal teams on their go-to-market strategy on their APIs. And I'm really excited to be here today. And thank you for having me again.
Awesome. Like I said, a phenomenal panel here and lots of experience and perspectives that we'll be able to dive into today. I really want to kick off the conversation here really around kind of, we've got a lot of people who have experience with documentation and getting tools out to developers. So what do you feel like is the biggest hurdle when it comes to a developer learning a new tool or a new technology? Would someone like to go first?
I can take a first stab at that.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I think the biggest thing that I see my team doing is finding the specific pieces of friction and doing whatever we can to get rid of those. So for some people, it might be making sure that, our getting started guides are front and center when someone clicks through to the developer page, or making sure that they're really easy to access from our documentation. We actually set up Google Analytics recently to walk through the steps that developers are taking as they're getting started and walking through that getting started process, and created separate pages for each step. So then we could very easily see, when are developers falling off? When are they not continuing with the getting started process? And kind of from that, draw some conclusions around, step 3 needs some help, or people are leaving to go download a piece of software, which is on a completely different website, and then not coming back to the same place in the getting started guide. And so really using that data to shore up our getting started experience as a whole, and kind of better understanding how people were walking through that in order to be able to create the best experience possible for them.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of analytics and funnels being built around the getting started guides and documentation. Does anyone else rely a lot on analytics and data, and how do you use those to inform kind of drop-off points and things like that?
Definitely. I don't work for the GitHub Docs team, but know that we've recently done a huge overhaul of the GitHub Docs to make them open source. So there's a bunch of cool tooling built around that to make that possible. I think that's even blogged about, really interesting to dig into. But one piece of data for us is like, how many contributions are people making to the GitHub documentation? When they encounter friction, can they solve it themselves? And short circuit GitHub even having to be kind of a gatekeeper in the middle there. So we found that open source has been really helpful there in terms of data collection.
Awesome. And I guess I'm curious a little bit more on GitHub and what you do specifically. Kind of on the partner side, how do you look at education for these partners and tools when using the APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. The GitHub API is vast, and I think came out like days after GitHub itself as a platform existed. So it's been around for a long time, and we can't hope to know anything about the breadth of what everybody is doing on the platform. So we try to make a really good experience for the partners that need help and that want to come to us. So we just launched a technology partner program. You can check it out at partner.github.com and sort of let us know that you're interested in integrating or building a business that connects to GitHub in some way. And through that, we try to provide resources and even in-person help when we need it, or when partners need it and ask for it. But it's definitely a learning process, and I'm really interested to hear your perspective on it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so kind of as we look at integrations and adoptions of technology, oftentimes companies rely on kind of a more fine-grained or smaller set of integration points. Tina, with such a wide breadth of integration points, whether it be APIs or otherwise, how does Transposit approach kind of educating developers with so many different integration points?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, one of the critical early decisions we made was to adopt OpenAPI. I think at that point it was still considered Swagger and hadn't been rebranded. But I think, when you ask that first question around documentation and tooling, my mind, because of where we sit and as a platform, is, use standards because that will reduce some of the need for as much documentation, since all the APIs will look a lot more similar. The other pieces that, we sort of focus on is, how do you shorten that onboarding cycle to kind of explore and play with new APIs? So, I think one of the best examples that I see from, external companies is Google's API Explorer that, handles the quick authentication and lets you quickly test and get feedback on every endpoint, because ultimately that's what people want for that iterative cycle more than they want to just scour through documentation and feel frustrated. And so that's sort of Transposit's approach too, is, in our developer console, we manage everything from authentication to the actual, calling of APIs through a standard format. So you can just quickly play around. It's more of a playground for APIs and any API for learning and adopting. And then, we serve as a standard interface on top of it all.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a metric of time to 200, and it's all about how quickly can you go from I want to use this API to actually using it, and just reducing that friction. I'm curious if anyone else has kind of ways that they help reduce that getting started workflows. Gigi, Elmer, any insight that you can provide from your companies?
Yeah, so that was a big focus when I joined the developer relation team, is actually getting started was also content-wise. We had content all over the places, and having a centralized place for all our APIs so we don't have to jump from one platform to the other. That was also really important. And I mean, recently we just launched something really new. It's like a data dev bingo, where we have mini challenges, and we also try to make any learning opportunity fun ones. So people don't feel like they have to go through code and they're like, oh, that's actually fun. I'm playing bingo, but they're actually learning APIs. So that's also a different approach we took, and especially because our audience, we have people that are just starting with code, and we have really advanced people that already know they are software engineers. So that was a good thing to have the different levels as well on the same page.
Absolutely. And I love this idea of kind of gamifying education and onboarding. I think Twilio does a great job with their Twilio Quest. So I'm curious, Elmer, how does Twilio kind of get that out to their community and think about that?
Yes, I was going to say, with regards to your first question about data, while we collect an extensive amount of just raw data from all sorts of places, there's nothing like the in-person data collection, if you will, through things like hackathons or Superclass, where we bring folks through Twilio Quest. And yes, Twilio Quest is one of my favorite things. I've even my 15-year-old daughter took to it, and she's loving it. And so that to me tells me that it's doing its thing. And then the other thing is to make sure that we never lose focus on what our developers are trying to accomplish. Shout out to SendGrid with the product team focusing on competing against luck, their idea about the jobs to be done. I think everyone should read that book. It's so valuable. It changed the way I was thinking about things. I mean, I always had a use case driven approach, but they took it to another level that I think will be really valuable for folks as they explore how to best serve the developers in their community.
And yeah, I love this idea of making it easy, getting started, and especially when it comes to beginners. I see, or I've seen, and I think we're getting better at it as an industry, but there's this high barrier of entry. And so really reducing that, I think it's widely important. I guess I'm curious, how do we, or how do all of you think about transitioning from that getting started beginner style onboarding into more advanced workflows? How do you really make them experts and champions of your tools?
I think having quick starts and starter resources that you can use is key. So just hitting the 101 level, because I always do that, right? Twilio is such a good example of how fun that can be. And after that, I think I look to the experts in my community, and if it's open source, then I can just stand on the shoulder of giants and kind of go for it by trying things out. Experimentation is really important. Having platforms that don't scream at you too hard when you break things, but give you an easy on-ramp to bigger and better things is really crucial.
Yeah, I really like that. And it's really important to kind of rely on this community. And obviously all of us have a lot of experience in some of that community building. How do you rely on that community to kind of scale up your education process?
We're doing that heavily at Camunda, I will say, because we started noticing, we've got a lot of these, cool, you aren't familiar with Camunda, try this demo, or here's a fun use case that we used to, one of my dev advocates this summer built a workflow to remind him to water his strawberries that were on his patio. Like, great, fun little projects, but not actually at the end of the day useful for someone who's sitting there going, I want to fix some of the processes at my company. I want to improve the workflow, not necessarily water my strawberries. And so we've been working really hard on figuring out where's that kind of in-between space. We have people who know how Camunda works, they know the value of it, but they need to then take it one step further. And we've got our documentation, we've got our getting started guides, and then we've got the like best practices for super advanced users, but we need that in-between space. So we've been relying on our community to a certain extent, looking to them to say, hey, what kind of resources do you need? What would have been helpful as you are getting started and getting up and running? What kinds of trainings are useful? We've got an internal consulting team that does a fantastic series of trainings. And so we're trying to take some of that and repurpose it into useful content and tutorials that we can post that are more widely available for people. But really, honestly, relying on our community and looking to them to say, give us feedback on what you need and what you're looking for, so that we're not just pulling ideas out of a hat and going, I think this could be good. Let's see how it goes, right? But actually spending our time on things that we know will be useful and beneficial to our community.
And especially as a startup, that's so important to make sure we're all resource constrained and making sure we're spending the time in the right places. And community is obviously such an invaluable resource. What are some other ways that all of you identify pitfalls or areas of friction during the onboarding process outside of just community?
I think credentials always is a sticking point. I've observed at a lot of hackathons that a lot of folks spend a lot of time just trying to get their credentials activated. And this is where I think OpenAPI provides a great workaround, because you can spin up pseudo servers and start playing with the API without even having any credentials. So I think as we evolve to more sophisticated developer playgrounds, that's going to really help out a lot.
I love that idea, and I think there's so much value in this standardization across the industry, and I've seen a lot of adoption in it. But what I want to dive a little bit deeper into right now, though, is how do you mentioned hackathons and these in-person onboarding events. How do you think about approaching it in this kind of new world that we're currently living in of virtual events? We're at a virtual conference right now. So what are some of the difficulties introduced to technology adoption with being remote, and how have your teams gone about solving those?
I can go first. I think we are not there yet. We are still looking for a solution, to be honest. But we try to move to Slack. So our community on Slack is growing, and we have different channels for different events we are driving, and we have different touch points as well with our community. And they know that every last Wednesday of each month, is correct, we have an event with them, and we have hosting a catch-up point for them, and they know that it's coming in the agenda. And virtual events, we are working and like making more interactive, and gaming as well as part of it. I you understood with the bingo, we like games and gamifying our developer community, but that's also something we are working on. And I think our community is called the Data Dev, and we are like adding the special touch of data devs everywhere we go.
I love that. Is anyone else throwing virtual events right now? And what are some of the ways that you're looking to approach that?
We haven't, with Transposit, we've not done any hackathons since we sort of evolved the product from that. And so we haven't had that pandemic issue, but we have had to onboard lots of developers onto, our DevOps automation platform. And, there's some interesting pieces around what's happened with the pandemic. One of our favorite tools that we've started using is this tool called Gong. And, it was originally designed and targeted for salespeople, but, we actually use it in all kinds of settings. And so it sits there in your Zoom calls, and it records and it transcribes. And so, that allows you to take certain onboarding sessions that you might have with the developer. You could share that recording with them if they have other members of their team that weren't able to make that event. We take that back internally. Obviously we let all of the people involved know that it's being recorded and they can see it in the Zoom. But we can take that back, and we can have our dev advocates, we can have our engineers, sales people, whatever, review those, and so you can actually take those opportunities to extract. Oh, I see this friction point. Let me now add some more documentation here. And so that's an aspect where I look back on it now and say, if we all go back to these in-person events, this is a super valuable resource that has allowed for so much product and engineering learnings, and an ability for our product engineers who maybe wouldn't be in those conversations and at those events to get that direct feedback. And so I hope that aspects of that stick around.
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that tool. I had it recommended to me by a sales engineer just last week, and it seems like a fascinating tool. And obviously things are changing and evolving with the current state of the world, but I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. There's a lot of value in capturing all of that data. So what are some, does anyone else have any other tools that they like to use similar to Gong?
If I could remember the name of it, it would be a better recommendation. But to talk about like a personal programming, group that I lead in my spare time, we're trying out this tool that we're just like in alpha phases of trying it out. But the problem is when one person is talking, everybody else kind of has to listen in a Zoom or in a conference, and that can get really tiring, right? Like Zoom fatigue is a real thing. And so this tool like hooks up to basically give you like a 2D mini map that you can video game around in. And the closer you get to a group like the JavaScript corner, you can only talk to the people in that JavaScript corner. So I've just seen like Hacker News and Product Hunt and a lot of startups pop up that address this need. And I don't think it's going to go away after the pandemic clears and we are able to go back to in-person events. I think there's going to be like a medium, maybe an in-between kind of world where people still want the advantages of same time space, but they want a little bit more flexibility if they can't attend and they want to glean the best from the event.
Yeah.
John, is that tool? Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, is that tool called Gather? Because that's at least one of the tools that falls into that category. I just thought I'd interject in case anyone's interested.
Thank you, Tina.
Gather.town. Gather.town. Yeah. We use it internally just to. We have a virtual office. Sorry, Mary, don't just jump in and chime in here real quick. But we have a virtual office set up, and one of our front-end engineers actually went through and replicated our entire office in San Francisco with all of the details around the plants in the office, and then she puts up decorations. But it's everything that John said, but it gives you also a little bit of personality and replicates aspects of in-person. We have like 2 lunch tables, and you can go sit at one of the lunch tables and talk to a subset of the team.
That's amazing. I love that. I know for my team, we feel similarly about, we miss in-person events. We definitely miss getting to see people, getting to talk to people, and having those more organic conversations. But we've done a lot more to make sure that the community still feels listened to and still feels heard right now. So we have a once a month question corner where people can come and bring their questions. We use an app called Slido for collecting questions in advance, and then people can vote on those questions during this hour. We have special guests, so sometimes we'll have specific topics that we focus on, but it winds up being kind of a combination of an Ask Me Anything and office hours with our engineers and with our dev advocates. That's been a great way to get feedback and, hear about feature requests that people are looking to do, or interesting ways that people are using our product that we wouldn't necessarily have known about otherwise. And to me, it feels very similarly to the booth experience where someone walks up and goes, "Hey, so I was playing around with things and I do things this way." And everyone kind of goes, wait, you do what? How do you do that? And talk to me about that again. And these are recorded. So we put them up on a YouTube channel and everything else, but it's a great opportunity to collect that feedback and still be able to connect with those community members one-on-one. We also did an online unconference as a part of our user conference back in October, where, you know, people submit discussion topics that they want to talk through. We call in some of our, you know, community members who have been around for a really long time to help lead those discussions. And we actually had a few community members who have been around for years at this point who reached out personally after the fact and said, this is by far my favorite event you have ever done. Not online, but ever, because it felt like a good opportunity to just discuss some of these issues and hear how other people are using your software. So we're definitely wanting to continue things like that, both for the next year, as well as once things go back to in-person.
And yeah, I think it's so important, this idea of really highlighting your community and making sure their voices are heard. And it's different now, but we're starting to find ways to do that a little bit better. I think we've talked a lot about documentation and education. I'm curious, kind of to your point, Mary, about feedback and seeing how users are using a platform. How do you see kind of product feedback and getting that to the product team and the engineering team fitting into this technology adoption, and how do you really facilitate the connections between those different teams?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love about Camunda, and I've never seen this at other companies, and they had established this before I joined, which I love because then it's not something I have to set up. But we have weekly stakeholder meetings for every single one of our products, for all of our components. And those stakeholder meetings bring together a member of the developer relations team, the support team, the sales team, product, and the engineering lead. And it's an opportunity for everyone to come together and say, hey, here's what we're hearing from customers. Here's what we're hearing from, you know, open source issues that are being filed on GitHub. We had someone pop up the other day asking, how do I integrate and deploy with this specific set of software? Has anyone else heard of people trying to do that? Do we have resources around that? Is it worth building resources if that's something that we're also hearing from support and product and sales? And I love these meetings because it's a far more active feedback loop. Whereas I feel like a lot of companies that feels very passive, where DevRel kind of pops up and goes, we have feedback to pass along, here you go, and we send it over. And we don't really necessarily, unless we're actively looking for it, we don't have the opportunity to then say, what's the end result? What can I tell the community member? Whereas these meetings, it's 1 hour every week. They're expensive meetings as a result, right? Based on everyone you're bringing into them, but they're so productive and so effective in really being able to understand this isn't just what I'm hearing, but this is what everybody is hearing. Here's the scope of the problem, and here's really how we can fix it across a bunch of different departments.
Awesome. And I love this idea of kind of bringing stakeholders together. Elmer, I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, you mentioned a lot of feedback and insight from the SendGrid team and that acquisition. How does Twilio kind of approach that? Is there overlap? Is there sharing of knowledge and resources between Twilio and SendGrid, and also just between the teams individually? Yes, there's a lot of sharing. We extensively use internal tools like Slack, and then also meetings that are cross-functional. But one of the things I think is very important is to write it down. It's one of our Twilio magic principles. Yeah. You know, it doesn't exist until it's on paper, and then folks can actually collaborate on the document. What we found very valuable is to give folks time before meetings to be able to have time to digest and give feedback before the actual meetings. I think that's really important because sometimes, you know, with our day job, it's hard to find that time. So we reserve some time in the beginning of the meetings to do that, to get that feedback. Yeah, it's being able to parse all of that data and not feel like the feedback that you're getting is going into a black hole is a really, really tough challenge. One of the things that I always do to try to advocate for a developer is to have them post their issue publicly, usually on GitHub, and have it, you know, be front and center, and then have other folks come in, +1 it, or add comments, because then we get a much stronger case that we can present to say, look, this is a serious problem. We have 30-some people who are saying that this is hurting their developer lives, and so it should have some attention. And plus, it provides another level of validation. And then hopefully through those folks that are providing feedback, we can
dig deeper and get even further information about the pain that they may be suffering, and then circling back and alleviating that pain.
Absolutely, and GitHub is such a great tool. I guess I'm curious, John, working at GitHub, and I know that you use it a lot internally, obviously, as well. Do you have any best practices or tips to utilize the platform to better capture feedback and make sure things are documented well?
Oh man, yeah, Elmer hit it spot on. You've got to write it down. It starts there, and you know, if you're not someone that likes to write, you can now leave like video memos and issues. Just release kind of a video upload functionality. So get it into the tools that your team uses is the thing. But with async, it's just so common to leave something written, and I think there are big advantages to that. And it's up to your team workflow to check in on that regularly. I mean, have a rhythm, but then also have some variety. Like, it gets really boring to just hit the meetings thing really hard, or just to like say no meetings, we only read each other's writing. Like, have a healthy mixture to make sure that people can do their best work even in a pandemic. And the final thing I would just say is, when you can, automate your workflow. GitHub Actions is how we automate a lot of our like scheduled issues. We'll just use this built-in automation engine to kind of power a new issue that pings everybody on the team and, you know, asks for structured feedback in a certain way. Or there are lots of examples of what you can do with it, but I think just, you know, ease the friction when you can, meet regularly, and mix it up.
Absolutely. And I love this concept of write it down. We struggle with it and are finding ways to do it better. And it's so important to make sure it's documented. Gigi, I guess I'm curious. You mentioned your Slack community and that being a thriving developer community. How do you parse through? I've found personally that Slack there's a large volume of messages and there can be a lot of information there. How do you personally manage that community and make sure that effective action is being taken based on feedback there?
So, I mean, Slack is part of our workflow already. So we kind of it's easier to go to Slack than going to a Tableau community forum or somewhere else. So that's also a big change for us. And once we have that's easier also to include an engineer and create one-on-one relationship, so they can go and take this issue and share maybe confidential information that they will not share it in the public space. And it's easier to create this relationship and be like, okay, that's the engineer that's working on that, and that's what the developer, and they can jump on the call if they need to. But it's really like connecting the dots, basically. And I think that's awesome. Easier. But yes, I think we are actually working on like the way we can make it more efficient, because I think Slack is a great tool, but for a person that go in first in public, you post something in the public space, like everyone is going to see it. So you need to be confident. And also, when you go on forum, you're like, oh, let me check if someone asked the question before. And I think that's also something we need to do a better job. So we created bots to like recall people and say, hey, before posting the question, be sure that you check previous questions. So we have also a welcome bot that tell them where to post questions, and that's only for APIs and not building dashboards. That's also not an issue. So we have all this automation coming up as well.
That's great. Automation is key, making everyone's lives easier. We've mentioned it with GitHub Actions, and I've seen it in Slack before too. So I want to take a step back and really get back into kind of APIs and what's on the cutting edge. During the intro, I mentioned a huge increase in GraphQL and async APIs. We're seeing adoption of Kafka as well. So are any of you looking at these new technologies, or are any of your companies working on implementing them? And if so, how do you think that will impact developers' day-to-day lives and the documentation and education required?
I can start. We just launched, I think 2 years ago, the first GraphQL API. And awesome. Oh my God, I love it. And it just makes it easier. So it's to query the different assets on Tableau. And so it's really about relationship and questions you're asked. It's like, okay, workbook data sources. And the GraphQL interface is just like so much easier for a person when we talk about discovery and explorability. It's like they can directly from the interface query the information, and that's really awesome. And the community loved it as well.
Definitely. And I love this idea of new technologies, not only kind of making it more efficient and better, but actually making the onboarding process easier. I've had the same experience of GraphQL. It's a great experience getting onboarded, and it's very logical. So I think that's fascinating. Tina, with Transposit, is GraphQL something that you're looking at as an integration point, or any of these other technologies? And how does your team approach that, again, with so many different integration styles and methodologies?
Yeah, so, I think a few things. We use GraphQL internally for our client, our web client, to talk to our backends. But in the parts that we expose to the public, we do not yet adopt GraphQL. I think that the reality is, it's still early days for GraphQL. I think when you are, honestly, almost any of the companies that are here today, we're still on the forefront compared to the majority of enterprises out there. And so I think that the adoption curve for GraphQL is still going to be a while. I think that platforms like Transposit can really help alleviate the need for them to even understand or know the nuances and differences of GraphQL. Because, Transposit acts as that intermediary. So, of all of the different connectors that we've been asked to connect with, we've only run into, I think, one or two that require us to use GraphQL as that integration point. So, we're positive on the future of GraphQL, which is why we chose to adopt it for our internal communications. But, the other big limitation with GraphQL is we really focus on helping bridge together and integrate APIs across different platforms. And that's an area that, out of the box, GraphQL isn't designed to really attack, right? Like, how do you even manage to have authentication and all of those different pieces? And so for us, it's really, we initially adopted a SQL interface, but, the majority of our developers these days use Python, given that we're focused on the DevOps and SRE markets. And so they just use an SDK to sort of connect and combine across all of these different services.
Definitely.
I did, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I did just want to make one note on the discussion around automation, because that's a lot of, what Transposit focuses on. Bringing it back to that whole notion of write it down, one of the things that I think is really important is ultimately what writing it down is, some of it is around informal documentation on what you're interested in, but a lot of it is for process, right? And so, what John mentioned around, it's really critical to have process automation. I think that the combination of write it down and automation is really just a question of codifying process between humans and machines. And so, that's just something that we think about a lot at Transposit. And, we choose to use runbooks, which I think everyone here is very familiar with, as our mechanism for that. But I think it's really important that people don't overly fixate on APIs versus, free-form text as how they choose to sort of do this documentation, because really the hybrid world is where it's at.
Absolutely. And it's really all about meeting people where they are and making sure they're comfortable with those tools. I guess I'm curious, kind of, as we look at cutting edge technologies, and I completely agree with you, GraphQL is still very early in its adoption in the market. How do you think about launching new products and getting ahead of the education? And at least at RapidAPI, we kind of look at launching new products and trying to get documentation in place, but it's hard to document a product that isn't yet released. So how do all of you approach that as you look to release a new product or integration?
I can start with that. There's a couple of things that my team does specifically. One, we're in very close touch with the engineering team to make sure that we're aware of what's coming, right? Are there major changes to the API that are coming with the next release? Are there breaking changes? Are there minor changes? What needs to be fixed in the community repos that we're maintaining? Because we maintain things that aren't technically part of the product all the time. And so making sure that we're aware of what's coming up so that we can kind of be that canary in a coal mine to say, hey, this isn't working like we think it's supposed to work, or this introduces further changes or further issues that we're going to have to make sure that our other community maintainers are aware of. So that's kind of the first thing that we do. I also view our team very much as an R&D department. So doing a lot of research, both with the community, what is our community of users using? What are they wanting? What are they looking for new features and things like that? But also more broadly throughout tech, what features are people looking to? What new frameworks are people using? How are people using things differently than maybe we've seen before? And that gives us an opportunity as developer relations team to take that information internally and say, look, we're seeing people move in this direction. And they might not be there yet, right? GraphQL might not be the most widely adopted thing right now, but that might be something that everybody's moving to in a year and a half. And if we're wanting to keep up with what's going on, we need to start thinking about that now, not a year and a half from now, when suddenly all of our customers are going, hey, why don't you have this integration? But now, because if that's where we really think the market is headed, we need to be there when the community gets there, or else we're going to lose those people. And so there's a part of us that I think our responsibility is, making sure that we are meeting the needs of our customers now, but then also that for developer relations, for industry relations, for community folks, that we're looking ahead to where are things going so we can help our company be more prepared to meet our community's needs in the future.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. And it's funny how much a part of our job is figuring out what's next, figuring out what's new. What are some of the ways, as obviously we all know how difficult that is, what are some of the ways that you go about figuring out that cutting edge, what's going to be next, and how do you identify that?
Well, I can give you a few. One of the things that helps me keep up to date is podcasts, because when we're doing various things like exercising or chores, it's a quick way to, like the Daily Tech News Show and things like Changelog, just kind of keep yourself refreshed on what's new and interesting in the world. Traditional news, just kind of see overall trends, and just kind of having the hat of the developer on, and how are you going to serve what's going on, like for example with the recent currently process of a pandemic, and then things like local tech events, meetups. I think John mentioned that before. Your traditional social media like Reddit, Quora, Twitter, Facebook, and StackShare, and then the internal channels at work. We mentioned before that Slack can get really noisy and busy, but some of that is really good, and there's a treasure trove of information in there. So make sure you're in all the channels where folks are just kind of riffing about what's new and cool. And then just your normal search every once in a while. Just hop on Google and see what's going on. And then finally, I really love the idea of wearing the developer's shoes. When we have a product that's going out that may not be quite released, just pretending like you're starting from scratch as a developer with a fictitious use case, and just meticulously documenting the process as you go through. And in my opinion, you end up finding a treasure trove of ideas going through that process yourself.
Absolutely. Is there any aspect of kind of employee onboarding that you really make that a part of the onboarding process and get that fresh perspective on a tool? Do any of your companies make that a part of the onboarding flow? And what have you found makes that most effective?
Well, one of the things, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say we do. And actually our DevRel team is some of the primary facilitators of that newbie training, we call it. And so we do walkthroughs of the product. We hear from people, why are you here? What have you heard about Camunda? What do you like about it so far? And get some of that fresh feedback. But then for my team specifically, for all of the dev advocates who join our team, their project for the first week is walk through one of our getting started guides, give the team feedback, and then file a pull request to fix something that you had a problem with as you were trying to onboard yourself.
That's awesome. And I think that's such an effective use of kind of that fresh set of eyes. Does anyone else do that at their company? What are some of the nuanced ways that you facilitate that employee onboarding?
I think see one, do one, teach one is a good framework. And, you know, there's a reason that it's lasted so long in the medical community. I think when you hear something, you retain like a small percentage of what you hear, although I'm really trying to capture Yoel's words because you're giving like so many knowledge nuggets of gold here. But and then like you learn a little bit more and retain a little bit more when you have to do it. But then when you teach it, that's gold. And so for GitHub, I remember, you know, I onboarded 2 years ago or so and had to kind of teach my team about a particular aspect of the GitHub platform. And I found that really helpful, probably less than they did, but it helped my understanding. And then they could kind of hear it from that newbie perspective, like Elmer was talking about. You know, as I'm like learning, I'm going to see some rough points maybe that they haven't seen before because they have been immersed in it for more years than me. And so yeah, +1 to what Elmer said. I think that's a great idea. There needs to be like a newbie swap, you know, like Twilio and GitHub trade, DevRel, like you hit up my documentation, I'll hit up yours, share feedback, it'll be great.
It's an awesome idea. I would
Absolutely.
That's Elmer, that's all him.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, I was going to mention that we did that one time. I remember we had someone on board and I wanted to get some feedback on our Go library. And so what I had them do is, without any prompting, said, make a first API call using this library. And I just watched them struggle and go to different places. And I was like in horror, like, oh no, this is not the way. I didn't expect that at all. But it was such an amazing experience. I learned so much. I wish I could do that more often.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That first experience and just don't give them any context, just see what they do is invaluable. So we've talked a lot about education, onboarding new users. I want to spend a little bit more time on retention. How do you make sure that your power users and your communities are really supported and that they stay active in using your technology?
I can go first here. We launched last year a Tableau ambassador program for developers. So that was a big change. We have la crème de la crème, the best of the best, on our APIs and sharing knowledge. And we can see already people, we launched it last year, and we see people that are publishing and sharing more just because like, oh, this program looks nice. That's something I want to take part of. So we are encouraged to share more and use APIs even more. And other people are inspired as well. And they say, oh, that's what they can do. And we showcase their work. And they're like, oh, now I need to get on board. I need to continue. And telling also their stories, because some of them started like learning APIs, coding at the same time, and sharing that as a success story and say, look, they did it. You can do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll double down on the amplification side of things for sure. That, you know, amplifying the work that your community is doing, even if it's just, you know, a community member says, hey, I accomplished this thing, or I finished this project, and quote tweeting them in your official company Twitter account, like people lose their minds over that and love it. It's such a huge shout out and it's such a big deal. And it takes 30 seconds of our time, right? Publicly thanking for someone for submitting a PR, publicly encouraging someone who's saying, I'm going to try this API for the first time. Like there's a huge impact, and it's a very small thing that we can do.
Yeah, we take a slightly different approach just because of where we're a little bit more enterprise focused. But, you know, we do a lot upfront with helping set that use case and helping the customers understand what they're trying to build. Going full circle back to, I think it was Elmer who was talking about the jobs to be done. You know, the way that you keep people engaged and retained is making sure that you're actually delivering them real value. The critical piece is to help people go from doing little hackathon side projects on your APIs to building things that make their lives easier every single day. And so, there's an aspect of it that's really about understanding and talking to your users, getting the sense of what their actual, fundamental first principles of like, what do they want to do and where's their pain? And then, you can take that and scale it through content. Either your blog posts that help people understand the different use cases, but, really focusing on getting people excited for things that will change their lives.
Absolutely, and I love this idea of kind of focusing on what developers care about. I think this idea of highlighting them, and developers love to be highlighted and shown as experts, and so that's such an easy thing to do. Similarly, focusing on what can actually turn it not just into a hackathon project, but into something bigger that they can spend more time on and grow into a real product or company even. What are some of the other things that you find are most impactful when it comes to highlighting a developer and making sure that they're seen and heard?
We like bringing them to our conferences to speak to the entire company, and it's kind of a two-way street there where we get to feel the pleasure of how we help them, but then they get the opportunity to show off the amazing stuff that they're doing. And we have a program similar to what other folks have with Twilio Champions. Same thing, trying to promote them and highlight the amazing work that they're doing in the community. Giving them shout outs on social media. And then, same thing in GitHub when we're reviewing PRs, giving them that recognition. I think that's important to a lot of people. And finally, I would say, don't underestimate the power of the t-shirt. It is amazing what, developers really love a nice t-shirt.
Absolutely. The swag is vital. It's a t-shirt, socks. I've seen so many different variations of it. I've got a full wardrobe of just conference t-shirts.
Yes.
So I love this idea of community and building on top of it. Do you find a need to provide specific educational resources to that kind of champions program, or what does it look like on a day-to-day providing back to that champions program? Is it educational materials? Is it taking them to conferences? I guess I'm just curious where you spend your time with that kind of subset of users.
I can go first. So we actually have a roundtable every month. So where we hear from them and we also show what's coming next. And we also sometimes have product manager because they all sign an NDA when they join the program. So we have product manager talking about new features. We give them swag. So we don't give t-shirts. We have a mascot is a T-Rex, and people are crazy about the T-Rex onesie. I swear, I go around. It's like, can I have a T-Rex onesie? And I'm like, no, sorry. But that's also the time we spend in just sending them swags and things as well, and just being also encouraging them. I think Mary said it, like retweeting what the blog post, sharing what's on social media, and also encouraging them to write this blog post, because some of them are shy and like, you know what, I'm not sure that's the right audience, or I don't know enough. And that's also there, you're their coach in a way, and say, yeah, you can do it, and let me help you.
Awesome. Well, with about 5 minutes left here, I really want to take some time to allow all of you to kind of recap your thoughts here. What do you find is most important when it comes to technology adoption? How do you see kind of the next few years, and especially in COVID? What are some of the things that you're going to be focusing on? I'd just love to hear kind of final thoughts and remarks from each of you. Gigi, if you want to go first.
Yes, I'm going to start. I think it's lowering the barrier for API entry barriers for APIs, being sure that we're inclusive and that people have access to the right community. I also like what Tina said about enterprise focus and use cases. So I think that's also something we will be focusing on in the next year, and just continuing our living in this new world of the virtual.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. John, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a beautiful quote by Andy Hertzfeld from the original Macintosh team about making open platforms. He was saying something that, by making the Mac open and by making it tinkerable, I'm butchering the quote, but that people were able to do even more creative and imaginative things with the Mac than Apple did. And I think in this last year, we've seen the power of online community. And so, go find your community, go find them online. If you're in a place that's safe enough to meet in person, go find them in person. But be sure that you're building cool stuff together and that you know where your community's at. That's just my kind of 2 cents about the past year is the power of working together. Thank you all.
People are everything. Mary, do you want to go next?
Sure. So the biggest thing for me, and this is kind of piggybacking on what John just said, but listening to your community, right? Not assuming that you know what they want, not assuming that you know what they need, but making sure that you're really taking the time to listen to them, and not just the answers to the specific questions that you're asking, but listening to what they're saying in your forum, listening to what they're saying in blog posts or on social media, and seeing the questions that they're asking. And that helps you so much to figure out what resources they need, what next things they're excited about or interested in, and helps you really to narrow down what the truly most important and highest priority tasks are for you to be doing.
I love that. Listen to people. And again, people are so important. Your community is so important. Yeah. Tina, any final thoughts or remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what I'm seeing a lot of is this overall rise of different platforms for workflow building effectively. Because when you think about where APIs really empower people, DevOps is a huge rising space for APIs. But, anything that is basically miniature business applications, that's where APIs really thrive. And so I think that's why you see increasing number of competitors around these different low-code builders. Transposit, I think, takes a much more advanced and sophisticated approach. I think that, the ability to not have to write as much code, but then enable developers to then plug in the customization into this greater kind of framework is going to, we'll see more and more of that.
Absolutely. And the power of combining multiple data sources and APIs together and flowing them together and making everyone's lives easier. I think that's going to be a really interesting next few years. Last but not least, Elmer, any thoughts, any comments that you want to end the show with?
Oh, no pressure, huh? I think you all pretty much dropped the mic, but I would just say, please, everyone, please help to give voice to the developers that are not heard. I think that there's a lot of developers out there, for whatever reason it may be, a lot of us are introverts, they just don't have a voice. And so we need to figure out ways how to give them a voice. And we're not experts yet. We don't claim to know how to do that super well. But I think if you make that part of your journey, using all these tools that everyone mentioned to really listen and really understand, and then really help uplift those folks who don't have someone to help them express their voice. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, what an awesome way to end this panel. Thank you so much again for all of you taking the time here. I learned so much, and I hope the audience did as well. I really appreciate your time, and definitely would love to stay in touch after this and continue the dialogue. So thanks for Postman, the conference, and that's our time.